So I didn't really have much of an idea of what I wanted to initially start talking about for this week's topic, but I think I'm just gonna wing it this time, and then I'll see where it goes. It's kind of been a while. I know like the last 3 or 4 episodes have kind of been planned, but yeah, we're gonna go back to a little bit of the wingman style on this one. But welcome to this week's episode of Divergence and Divine. My name is WIllspiration, and I ended up having to get a cloud lifter because my SM7B Shure mic was a little bit quieter than I expected, and I finally got up enough money to invest in a cloud lifter. And then it turns out that actually there was another mic, a newer version of this mic called the SM7DB, and it comes with a preamp installed with it so that you don't have to buy one. But even buying the cloud lifter and another short XLR cable, it still pretty much cost the same. It might have been like $40 more than if I would have just bought the SM7DB, but it's okay. But at least now the I can play around with the gain a lot better. So now when I do talk quieter, it looks way better in Audacity. And I kind of found that like turning the knob up to like somewhere between what I would consider 7 and 8 on the scale, looking at the knob right now, is like perfect. And then that way it doesn't sound too terrible when I have to do a little post editing magic to make my voice sound a little clearer on it. But I think what I want to talk about today is something that I've noticed is that like people are just I think the way that we're going about trying to bring more awareness is hold on, I'm trying really hard to think about my words very carefully here. It's a good approach, but I think the main issue is the fact that we as an autistic population are extremely and heavily outnumbered. And I feel like that's why a lot of our, trying to bring awareness isn't really going anywhere, because the issue that I've noticed is that you have to remember that most neurotypicals, the way that they understand autism is they understand autism as level 2 and 3 are autism, and use more labels that I know some or a vast majority of the autistic population view as harmful by saying high functioning and low functioning, rather than saying something like high support needs or low support needs, or or needing or requiring some support or requiring substantial amount of support, so that it's not as like demeaning and degrading and humiliating. And I feel like the way that just the media portrays it to neurotypicals is just it's not really helping us at all. Because you also have to remember too that there are also plenty of level 1 autistics like myself that exist that we don't look autistic, because I think the concept of looking autistic is like when you see someone that is, on the spectrum that's level 3 and they're constantly stimming and they're nonverbal. And a lot of people go, oh, yeah, that's autism. And then, or like they see a level 2 autistic that can talk and they kind of see that they struggle to talk a little bit, or that, their speech is a little bit slower, or that they have a speech impediment. Um, you know, any of the things that we typically associate with level 2 autism, they see and they go, oh, that's high functioning. Like they can talk and everything, but they still need support. And then there's just level 1 autistics where, we can pass as neurotypicals and they go, oh, you're not autistic. And the problem is that like when you remove level 1 autistics from that, immediately that just one doesn't help us, because we are on the spectrum and there are level 1 autistics that do need some level of support in certain things. Maybe not like, to the extent of level 2 or level 3, but, someone on level 1 might still need help with, bathing every day because they need, because that's something that is extremely stressful and overwhelming for them. So they need someone there to keep them calm and not say, hey, go take a shower, but be like, hey, I know taking a shower is scary and I know you don't like getting wet and you don't like the feel of water on your skin, but I'll be right outside the door. If you need me, just let me know. And if you have a meltdown, it's okay. I'll come in there and I'll be with you. So, don't, it'll be okay. I promise. I won't leave you, and just have that person there. Or, maybe someone like me where it's like, I might need someone to come in and help me with like meal prep. And it's like I should, be able to call someone and be like, hey, I'm struggling really hard to try to get this meal prep done for the week. So I have food to eat. So I don't have to worry about cooking as much. Do you think, I could get someone to come over and help me with that? So then that way, I can get this done quicker. Because if not, I mean, yeah, sure, I could do it myself, but it's like, it's very overwhelming. And I feel like, you can only leave ingredients out so long before they'll start to spoil. So it's like the sooner I get someone to come and help me, the faster I can get it done. And then, it's not as overwhelming. But that really just makes up a lot. Not a lot, but I feel like it kind of hurts the autism community as a whole when you remove level one because, there are, like I said, some people that might need a little support, like coming out, having someone come out and check on them like once or twice a week and help them with something, or have someone there every day for like that one specific time where, like I was using the example earlier of someone that struggles to bathe because they don't like being wet, because they don't like the feeling of water on their skin because of sensory issues, then that one person comes in for like an hour a day, helps, this person with anything they need help with and helping them shower, like so that they don't feel overwhelmed. And then after that, that's pretty much it, right? But at the end of the day, it's still detrimental to the autism community as a whole to just remove level one from the equation because now we level one autistics that might require some support somewhere in life because of the way autism affects us is now being ignored because the neurotypical world doesn't see us as autistic. And that really, really just does not help in promoting like awareness and acceptance of autism and really trying to get the world to change their views from a neurotypical standpoint to a neurodivergent standpoint. But the thing is, too, is that like, and I know I might get a little bit of hate for this, but the other thing, too, is that we also have to understand that neurotypicals don't understand us either. So the biggest thing that we have to do is we have to find a way to meet in the middle. We have to find a way to bridge that gap between neurotypical and neurodivergent. And sometimes changing mindsets and learning a different way of thinking when your brain isn't able to do that because there's a wiring difference is very, very hard. It is very hard because you're trying to learn something that your brain can't really process. So neurotypicals are going to struggle to understand us, and we're going to struggle to understand neurotypicals. But if we can find a certain way and a certain style to communicate, and they can find a certain way and a certain style to communicate with us, then all of a sudden, if we hit strike that right balance, all of a sudden it's like the two worlds are connected and all of a sudden there's no barrier between us. It's like the two styles mesh together perfectly and it's like, oh, okay, so now that makes more sense. It's like I saw on Instagram an example of like how a lot of people typically are iPhone users, and for the longest time you could only find Android stuff, and then there was always that like small section for, or did I say Android? No, I meant iPhone stuff. So you could only find iPhone stuff, and then you would have a small section of Android stuff. And then even at airports, they would have charging stations for iPhones, but not for Android. And then that within the last few years, it finally became more standard to have iPhone or not only have iPhone charging stations, but Android charging stations as well. And someone was just like, it's like basically when you're trying to communicate with someone that's on the spectrum, It's like telling them to use FaceTime on an Android phone when we know that Android phones don't have FaceTime. And that's a very good example. And I really like that example. It's a great example. And they said, but you know what? Both versions of phones can use Skype. Or if two people have Facebook Messenger, they can video chat on Facebook Messenger. Or if they have WhatsApp, they can call or video chat on WhatsApp. And it's a nice way and a nice analogy to basically say that there are different ways to communicate. You just got to find that specific style where you can actually communicate. And it is very, very challenging. And I think the biggest issue is that we on our side are too heavily promoting, they need to change their way and adapt to us. But the problem is that you're basically asking neurotypicals to do the same thing that they're doing to us, which is telling us to learn how to adapt to a neurotypical world by saying that they need to understand us and make, and accept us and make room for us is basically telling them to accept and change their way of thinking to neurodivergent thinking. And their brains aren't wired like that, just like our brains aren't wired to, for a neurotypical world. You're asking a neurotypical to try to understand a neurodivergent world. And I feel like that right there in and of itself is creating like a huge problem and a huge barrier in this as well. Um, I think really and truly what we need to do is we need to start, in my opinion, polling neurotypicals, right? And that could be, I'm sorry if you guys hear this, I'm wearing a windbreaker in my apartment because it's a little cold. So you're going to hear a little rustling. So I apologize for that. But I really think what we need to do is like, we need to poll neurotypicals. Like, we need to ask them, like, okay, we start small, like start with people that you might know, like coworkers or friends or family members or, you know, anyone that you might have some sort of contact with from time to time and be like, what about me confuses you the most as an autistic person? And then ask them like, what basically they don't understand and then have them give an example of a time where it doesn't make sense and then try to find basically an analogy because the one thing that I've noticed is that when you compare something with an analogy to neurotypicals, it kind of makes more sense to them. And analogies kind of make sense to us too. So I feel like analogies really is a good stepping stone for trying to bridge the gap between the neurotypical and neurodivergent world because both types of wiring of brains understand analogies. So the FaceTime versus Skype analogy is perfect. So if you find ways to start, small with the people that you do know and use analogies as like a way to explain something that they don't understand, then they go, "Oh, okay, so it's, that actually makes more sense." It's like anytime I'm struggling to understand something and then someone, explains it and then all of a sudden it makes me think of something that's very similar, then I go, "Oh, so basically it's kind of like when, da 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 and then this and that and then this is what happens." And then they go, "Yes, exactly." And then I go, "So if I understand this right, then I go, you know, da 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 is like this and that. And then this ends up being a result because it's a very similar process to the way this process works." And then they'll be like, "Exactly." And I'll be like, "Oh, okay. See, now that makes more sense." And then it also kind of gives them an example of, oh, well, if we give them an analogy, it kind of makes more sense. So then I feel like from there, we kind of branch out. Like, I feel like analogies is like the stepping stone. Like, that is step one. From there, we go from using analogies and then we kind of start branching out more because from there, you kind of start understanding, like, oh, okay, so they see this as this and we see it as this, but they really are basically the same thing, just a different way about going about it, but still yield the same results. And it's a very similar process. But I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of the biggest issue. And then the other biggest issue too, and this one's like primarily the main one, is the fact that we only make up, last time I checked, or which when I Googled it earlier today, according to Google and its little Gemini AI overview, the last known polling that the CDC did for autism population was we make up 1% of the whole world's population. So only 1% of the world is autistic. And that includes all three levels, from level 1 to level 3. So we have to find a different way to go about doing that, because unless we end up becoming more and more, of the world's population, it would take, at least from my personal opinion, it would take about 10 to 20% of the world's population before they go, okay, well, now we kind of have to start adapting, because the autistic population is on the rise. Like the neurodivergent population is on the rise, right? So our businesses are starting to hurt because they're not getting as many employees, because, they may not want to hire an autistic person. But then once you get to about like somewhere between like, I would say like 30 and 40% of the world population, then like neurotypicals would have no choice but to start adapting to us, right? But adapting doesn't mean changing. So the way that both sides are looking at this, from the neurotypical and neurodivergent side, is we keep saying adapting, but really what we're saying is we want each side to change and become like the other side, rather than adapting, which means, understanding and growing and learning. And adapting means bridging the gap. It means, learning to coexist with neurodivergence, right? So we neurodivergents need to learn how to coexist with neurotypicals, and neurotypicals need to learn to exist with, neurodivergence. But it's just the way that we're going about it is just not helping. And I feel like, honestly, that would help a lot, because anything that both style of brains can understand is another way to communicate effectively between both the neurotypical and neurodivergent world. But that's pretty much my standpoint on that. I just saw something earlier. Like I said, I saw that post about the FaceTime versus Skype debate, and like Android versus iPhone. That was an example, and I was like, oh, that's actually a really good example. I like that. So I just wanted to talk about that. Initially, I was going to do like a special interest episode and just kind of go off on a special interest tangent, because I was like, oh, well, I really wanted to talk about this YouTube video that I saw, and then I saw that, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna cover that first. But I think for sure next week's episode is gonna kind of divert a little bit. I'm actually gonna I have a special title for that episode, and it's gonna be talking more about the YouTube video that I wanted to talk about, because it brings up a very interesting theory. It brings up like multiverse theory, and then from there, it brings up like branching timeline theory, and then, in my personal opinion, like multiverse versus branching timelines, and how like sometimes it's like there's a difference. And I kind of want to use some examples of like what a multiverse is versus what like a branching timeline is. And me personally, I kind of feel like it's interesting, because I know that some people are like, well, technically a branching timeline is a different universe, because that in that universe you actually made this decision. But if you think about it really and truly, everything is exactly the same. You just made a different decision. So in my opinion, it's not actually a different universe. It's the same universe, different timeline. Whereas like, to me, a different universe could be like one where, me as a 32-year-old male could be doing this exact same podcast, but I'm a 32-year-old female. And, maybe I'm actually married, and maybe I had kids, as opposed to being single and living in an apartment, you know? Or there could be one where, humanoid fish people, are a thing rather than, humans, right? So like when I think of multiverse theory, I think of us existing either as opposites of ourselves in terms of like genders, or rather I should say assigned genders at birth, or we are just completely like a different species. Like we're still a humanoid species, but we're not humans. To me, that's what a multiverse would be. And then an alternate universe is still is still part of the multiverse. But that's like, in my opinion, I feel like that's the only way that you can still exist as a human. It would be like an alternate universe where you were born the opposite. Well, I guess technically, now that I'm thinking about it, it could also be like, you could have been born in a different country. And then for that universe, then there's an alternate universe where you were born in that same country, but as a different gender. So I guess, no, you know what? I guess that does make sense. But still, when you're talking about making decisions in your life that you are living right now, then you're basically just talking about like a branching timeline. And then I was going to talk about how that also goes kind of, in my opinion, with manifestation, because this video from a YouTuber, Moxie2D, he did a Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet Nuzlocke. And he basically, the way he weaved the story together was like, essentially like multiverse theory with a hint of branching timeline in it. But it was primarily heavily multiverse theory, and it just really got my brain thinking. And I was like, I wanted to do this episode about it, but then I thought, nah, I'll save that for episode 10. I'll save that for episode 10. It's like I've done 10 of these now. I've been at this for 10 weeks, which is really crazy, by the way. I like, when I think about it, I'm just like, this is my 9th episode. I've been at this for 9 weeks now. 9 weeks. And I'm just like, man, once I start doing this, time goes by really fast. And it's kind of scaring me because it's like, now it's already January. It's January. And now I'm like, holy crap, my birthday is in like 6 months. And that's wild. I'm going to be 33. And I don't know how to feel about that. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I just was like, I was just too excited about it. But then I was just like, nah, you know what? I might just pre-record that ahead of time, like on Friday or something. And then I won't even have to worry about recording next week. And then I could just kind of like chill next week and then throw up that episode on Thursday or Friday. But then I kind of struggled what I wanted to talk about for this week. And then, yeah, I saw that this morning. I was like, oh, perfect. That'll give me something to think about if I don't have something to talk about ahead of time. But I know I have like a friend that I don't really talk to that often, and I don't know if he watches my podcast, but really I think he's going to get a kick out of the title because like a long time, well, not okay, I shouldn't say a long time ago. I mean, that's a little excessive. It was 7 years ago. It'll be 7 years ago in March. And back in the day, like we were both, we both smoked weed, we were, I wouldn't personally call myself a stoner, but like he called himself a stoner. So he was a stoner. I was just like the casual smoker, I didn't start smoking until I was 25 because I remember being on the fence about it. And then I read that like usually between the age of 25 and 27, your brain is like fully developed. So really from there, like smoking in moderation won't really affect your brain as quickly as like if you were to start smoking from a young age. But one time we were high as fuck. And I mean like high as fuck. And we were sitting in his car, and then we just started going on these theories and these tangents for hours. Like I remember because I had left work because I worked the night shift as a custodian at a school district, and it was a Friday. And literally, I got off at 11. I drove up to his house, and it's like an hour away. And I got there just like, I think, I think I got there at like literally midnight on the dot. And then I got home before he got home from work. And then he got home 20 minutes after I got to his house. And then we just sat in his car, we lit up, and then we just went on a tangent. And before we knew it, it was like, it was 4:30 and we were taking a trip to McDonald's because we were hungry as fuck. And then by the time we came back, the sun was coming up. And I remember I only slept like 4 hours. And from that moment on, for like the next like 2 years, we basically had this thing that we called theory time. So anytime I'd go over there and hang out with him, it would just always be whether we were high or if we were, just, sober, we would always just have these different, tangents and theories like what ifs, because the one thing that I've noticed about having anxiety is like what ifs, right? So sometimes taking what ifs instead of having it be for an anxiety reason and just kind of going down the rabbit hole of what ifs just for no reason whatsoever leads to some interesting things. And I remember there were a couple times where we had these like little theory times, and then later on, we would like Google them and be like, I wonder if that actually exists. And then like all of a sudden, it's just like there was research done on it, or there are a lot of other people that feel the same way. Like, what if these little what ifs that we're thinking about are actually real? And it was, I miss it. Like it was fun times, but then like a whole bunch of stuff happened, and um we just kind of ended up drifting apart. I'm not the kind of person that likes to air my dirty laundry, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But we didn't talk for like 3 years, and I'm don't get me wrong, I like talking to my friend. Like, he's super cool, but sometimes it can be a little too much, like a little draining. And it's like not anything that he did wrong. It's just because like me, he's also autistic and ADHD, but there are just kind of some things that I think he still needs to learn and still needs to work on. And for me, like, therapy has been a huge help for me. And that's why I always say, like, I always encourage people to go to therapy because it really does help. And I know I've said this before many times to other people, and I mentioned it a couple times in the podcast already, but like, I have a therapist who's autistic herself, and that really helps because she has a style of acceptance and acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. And then she kind of incorporates a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. And the reason why ACT is more effective for neurodivergent people, especially autistic people, as opposed to CBT, is because CBT is basically more for neurotypicals, where they can learn to change the way they think and learn to like shift their thought, the way they think. Whereas like for us, that is basically more so a way to make us mask even harder than we already are, which kind of defeats the purpose of therapy. So ACT helps you accept who you are, accept that you're autistic, and then you sprinkle in a little bit of CBT for when you need it, like for anxiety, for example. Like, that's something where CBT is helpful because you kind of challenge your thoughts and, but when it comes to things about you as a person, like your self-image and your self-worth and self-love and things like that, ACT works a lot better because now you're not challenging those thoughts and telling yourself you need to be more neurotypical, you need to be less autistic, because at the end of the day, you can't change who you are. So instead, ACT aims to reaffirm that, hey, it's okay to be you. It doesn't matter what anyone else says, because having self love and self respect and self worth and not hating yourself means loving yourself for all of your flaws, all of your problems, and all of the good things too. So then it basically reinforces that even if there are things that you don't like about yourself, you still wouldn't be you without those, negative qualities. And if there are some things that you feel like maybe you can change, maybe, a little bit of CBT might help. But generally speaking, if there's not really, if you're not getting complaints from people about you, being a certain way, then you're good. Like for me, I know my parents were like, they always thought I was more self centered and that I didn't care about other people when, I was just trying to get people to understand me. But the more I kind of learned that when I'm not around my family, like I'm a very caring person and I always put others way before myself, kind of made me realize I'm not self centered. I care a lot. I just only get like that with my family because they don't understand me. And when people kind of initially misconstrued me as like being self centered when I would talk, they kind of started realizing that I was using my own personal experience as a way to relate to them. And they were like, oh, okay, he's just trying to relate. That makes way more sense now. And I'm like, oh, okay. So that made me feel a lot better. But one of the things that I think a lot of people are always ashamed of is being like seen as like over the top and, as my dad puts it, animated, because of the fact that we stim so much. Like, we stim a lot, and stimming can look like many different things. It could be, stimming could be like walking funny because it makes you happy because it's silly and silly things make you happy. It could be, your basic hand flaps or arm flapping or, spinning in a circle because you're bored, or pacing around the house because you just need to stay active because you like being active. And there's nothing wrong with stimming. And yeah, sure, it may, people may see you as weird, but at the same time, anything that makes you happy it really shouldn't matter what people think. Because if you doing stims makes you feel more like you and it makes you happy and it helps keep you grounded and calm, then it doesn't matter what people say, because at the end of the day, that is who you are. And I think that's just a very valuable lesson to remember. But with that, I'm going to end this episode here because I'm already at 35 minutes. Again, I'm probably going to trim out some of the filler, so it may not be 35 minutes. It could very well be somewhere between like 30 and 33 minutes. But I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. I hope you guys look forward to next week's episode of my little theory time tangent that I'm going to go on. And I'm going to get to editing this audio, which now that I have the Cloud Lifter preamp, isn't going to take as long. So it's just basically checking for filler. But as always, if you guys like this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and hit the notification bell, because the notification bell will let you guys know when I upload a new video. And with that, I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.